Hi, everybody. I'm excited to share this aspect of brain health resiliency with all of you. We're going to be looking today at the environmental impact and influences on brain health, and also nutrition, environmental aspects that we are particularly engaged in our work. Cancel. Hi, everybody. Let me start by introducing myself with another hat. I'm the Director of Integrative Nurse Coaching at a health center called Resilier. And this is in Hollywood, Florida, where people come from literally all over the world to try to find lifestyle changes and interventions for improving their cognitive function. Most of the people at most are in very early phases of Alzheimer's, but many are just people who are beginning to notice that they're not as sharp as they were. Their family notices as well. And as the Director of Integrative Nurse Coaching, I'm thrilled that I have the opportunity to sit with patients and families and our team, which is a very integrative collaborative model where we have acupuncture, psychology, functional medicine, nurse practitioner, and do a lot of testing and education. And I'm part of many of these aspects. And it's a beautiful role as a nurse and as an integrative nurse coach. So I want to share this with you today. And hopefully a lot of the materials will be on the dashboard, and I'll be available to answer any questions after this video Zoom call, and as well as along the way when questions come up when you're doing the reading. And again, I wish I were there with you today, but due to circumstances beyond my control, I couldn't be there. So the way we're going to begin is I'm going to share my screen and start to talk a little bit about the work that we do at Resilier and the influence and impact that it has on patients, on their hope, and on their recovery. So the first slide is really just looking at brain resiliency and what that means in terms of our potential for being able to influence behavioral change. You all know who I am. Just trying to get comfortable here with some of the screen that is okay. And we always have to have the disclosures. I will not go through that. But what I'd like to say is for the learning objectives for today, we want to identify specifically some of the exogenous compounds implicated in neurodegenerative conditions. I want to go between case studies, research, and some practical information. Many of you saw the environmental webinar that I did prior to your coming to this program, and it is in the dashboard. It's a more general overview of the environmental influences on health, which is a major cofactor, as we've often discussed in our program. But this is very much geared towards specifically the impact on the brain of very specific environmental contributors that can be implicated in brain dysfunction, cognitive dysfunction. So we'll also look at the link, of course, between epigenetics, nutrients, and environmental toxins, explore the integrative nurse coach role in this area of patient education and coaching, and really to go into a deeper understanding of the influence of food and food compounds in detoxification, in helping the body to break down and neutralize the compounds that are indicated that need to be released, modified, neutralized, and eliminated. And then we want to explore specific food plans for healthy aging and the healthy brain. And that's really some new exciting research. Of course, we always begin with Florence Nightingale, and we know that no amount of medical knowledge will lessen the accountability for what nurses do, and that is to manage the environment to promote healthy life processes. And in this case, we're talking about our current modern global environment, which is impacting populations across the world. We use our lifestyle influences on brain health in our Iowa tool, which you have already become familiar with, and looking at all aspects of the person, although today we're going to be addressing the environmental and the nutritional. But we know with the brain, like every other part of our whole person well-being, everything affects everything else. So we're always looking in the brain resiliency model, like in all of our coaching, what are the modifiable risk factors to improve cognitive function, our quality of life, and healthy aging? And we know that change is at the core of all of our interventions and all of our coaching conversations. And we're always, just to review, even in a person with cognitive decline, we're looking at the strengths we can focus on, the risks that are manageable, what is the person willing and able to do, and in this case, I'd say in their families, because most people that come to the practice also are coming with a family member, whether it be a child or a spouse or somebody that knows them well. And we need to always look at what are the roadblocks, the economics, the social determinants, the availability of healthy food. So these we need to really address and see how we can intervene. And what is always the first step in an action plan when a person leaves our practice? And I think you all remember this slide, that in modern chronic disease, we're looking at the nutritional influences, the dietary influences, the epigenetic influences, the genetic predisposition, our environmental load, and lifestyle habits, all closing in on how our genes express themselves. And so I want to start by just a small case study that could give you a glimpse into how we work with people with early cognitive decline. We want to know when this began. When did you first notice? Or very often it's a family member who first notices. So we're looking at how they lived their life. Here's a timeline which we'll be looking at shortly. Have they had occurrences, whether it be exposures to chemicals in a workplace environment? In this case, John had multiple head concussions while playing football in both high school and college. He also, 20 years fast forward, lived in a rented house that had a lot of mold. He developed a loss of smell, and his first cognitive symptoms actually were after he attempted to take out his mercury fillings after being advised. But when they were taken out, it was not with what we'll call a biological dentist. And so the mercury, probably the vapors, recirculated. And actually, because mercury tends to have an affinity to the brain, that was where he began his symptoms. He was seen by 5 neurologists. His symptoms seemed to get worse, especially his short-term memory, and he was put on Aricept. He had difficulty functioning in a job. He was a CEO and major owner of a company, and his family, looking for other options, found our center and came for a consultation. On the lifestyle side, John ate a typical SAD diet, the standard American diet, probably was nutrient depleted. He had poor sleep habits. He had a lot of stress due to his high level work pace, and he had a very limited environmental awareness. This is our timeline that we use. In the left-hand column, you'll see where it talks about antecedents and even conception and prenatal influences, the father who worked in a chemical plant, and the child who's born and maybe developed some behavioral issues. We always are looking at what else could have been the antecedents, what could have been the mediators and what could have been the triggers. In John's case, the antecedent was probably his head injuries as a youth. His mediators and perpetuators could have been his lifestyle, his diet, his lack of sleep. And the trigger could have been his removing his mercury fillings. And we fill this out as a way to keep almost a map of how we can keep the timeline. And we'll go into this in more depth. We know that there are toxins that are triggers that touch on our genetic predisposition, and then we mention mediators that might influence predisposing factors, and then the symptoms. I want to just quickly present a little bit of research, and I'll weave this throughout, that in neuroepigenetics and Alzheimer's, this is an update. This is from a 2018 journal on Alzheimer's disease, and it talks about epigenetics in the studies and the changes in gene expression triggered by both genetic and environmental factors, and how that influences our phenotype, and then how that affects how our genes communicate. So the epigenetic changes are really most influenced by age, environment, and any other predisposing factors that might contribute. And in the non-genetic factors, we know that the environmental factors are probably one of the main causes in late onset Alzheimer's, but we can imagine that those exposures have been there for many years. And we find that when we do our testing, which I will review shortly. So we also do look at genes, for example, the ApoE3 and 4, which can be a risk factor in increasing one's risk for developing Alzheimer's, but it does not mean the person will get Alzheimer's. The same way we know with any genetic predisposition that it's not our destiny. And so some people have the ApoE4, one parent or both parents, and they don't necessarily need to develop Alzheimer's if they know the genetic family history, and that's the perfect opportunity for us as nurses and as integrative nurse coaches to create lifestyle change and choice. So you all may remember this slide, which talks about the origins of disease and how the environment and exposures can decrease energy production and oxidative stress. And it could be toxic exposures from drugs and alcohol, smoking, the chemicals produced by stress and negative emotions, poor diet, lack of nutrients, trauma, such as John had, lack of exercise. Nicole is covering all of that. We know that exercise and movement is probably the #1 medicine for people to make sure that their brains stay healthy and they do not develop any cognitive symptoms. We know that the impact of toxicity on the body affects all systems, and I wanted to put this here because although we're talking about the brain, we know that the immune system, the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system, the GI system, to name other parts of us that are also impacted by the exposure to chemicals in our body. When we assess for potential exposures, we're always using our integrative nurse coach approach. So we're looking at, first of all, listening to the story. When did you notice? What was your first symptom? How have you been living your life? Are you aware of any exposures that might be impacting the way you feel? So we have the environmental exposure questionnaire, both in the Iowa tool, but we're going to have one that you're going to fill out during this program in a little while, and then think about where your exposures might have been. We also use an MSQ, which is a toxicity self-test. It's a MSQ stands for Medical Symptom Questionnaire. It's a functional medicine tool, and we find it very helpful to have people look at that. We have a nutrition assessment. There's many ways to do a nutrition assessment, and we can look at a food journal for 3 days, such as you've all done, and that gives a snapshot of what a person is eating, where their nutrient balance is, if they're eating a lot of sugar, if they're eating a lot of whole foods, if they're eating organic, and we try to extract that when we're talking about nutrition. And we already mentioned the Iowa and the timeline. So when we do an environmental assessment, because that's really one of the keys at the beginning, we're looking at the home, the workplace, the community, our lifestyle factors, and Nicole is covering this: alcohol, tobacco, recreational drugs, the polypharma that many people have, several drugs, and how their own interaction can impact cognitive function. We also want to look at the cleaning products, what people are using in their home and breathing in, and certainly their food purchases, the chemicals in the food. And when we look at assessing environmental exposures in our model, we're thinking about mold, about infections, about bacterial exposures. We're very concerned about heavy metals. We've all heard about lead in drinking water throughout this country. Genetic SNPs, which stand for singular nucleotide polymorphisms, which is like the genetic marker for Alzheimer's, but there's other genetic markers that might tell us if we have the ability to detoxify mold. It's called an HLA-4. So there's many ways that besides the ApoE gene that we can monitor genetic predispositions. We want to know about the microbiome. We all know that the gut has been called the second brain, and we're going to go into the microbiome in a later segment. And we look at the immune system, because the immune system is part of the gut, and the microbiome impacts our immune system as well as our neurotransmitters, affecting sleep and behavior and mood and depression. So the microbiome of its multi-billion organisms of diverse species is really instrumental in maintaining good health. So we want to know if people have had a long history of antibiotics, for example. And of course, we are working toward identifying toxic sources in one's life. We want to know about environmental exposures. For example, do people spray pesticides on their lawn, in their home for insects? Do they know the quality of their water? What are the products they use on their body? Do they live near an electromagnetic field, an EMF? And where do they live? Air quality. Do they live in urban environments, or do they live rural where there's lots of fresh air and open space and green space? So when we look at heavy metal toxicity, we know that heavy metals are everywhere. It's ubiquitous. But we also know that our body has a mechanism to detoxify and excrete them. We have natural chelators, including glutathione, which is made from nutrients in the body, can also be taken as a supplement. And we also need to know that the cardiovascular system and the renal system is really functioning, and the digestive system, so people can detoxify. And when we do an environmental exposure, this is a graph. It says toxic exposure occupational history, but you can also put toxic exposure residential history, community history. Do they aerial spray for pesticides and mosquitoes as they do here in Florida? So we want to know where they work, the dates. Was it a full-time job? Was it industrial? What were the duties? Were there known hazards in the workplace? Were they wearing any protective equipment, and were they ever needing to take time off because of awareness of exposure, allergies, etc.? And this comes up a lot with nurses, because we know that hospitals often have many chemicals. And in the prior environmental webinar, I talked a lot about Nurses for a Healthy Environment and what we're learning about hospital environments and how hospitals are beginning to change those environments. So take a moment and think about the exposures in your environment. Here in Florida, where I live, And now in many places, due to flooding and sea level rise and hurricanes, there's a lot of mold. And we're going to look at some of the research on mold and the brain, mold and the immune system. We want to know about, for example, I see people in Florida and they play golf and they live on golf courses, which are sprayed heavily with pesticides. What kind of foods do people eat? Do they know about the environmental working group and at least having the 12 foods that are most heavily sprayed on their bioorganic list? And here again, because we have sugar crops and other agricultural industry, we have a lot of runoff, and we also have shallow water tables, so we're concerned about drinking water. We ask people to test their waters. People have swimming pools and they put chemicals in the water as well as chlorine. We think about fragrances and personal care products, and I've already mentioned the heavy metals. So when we start to ask people questions and do a historical exposure, we want to know the last time that they really felt well. We want to know if it began after some change in their house. They bought a new house. They put in new carpets. They painted. Their home is near EMF transformers, or they live close to industrial park where there may be other chemicals. We want to know what their work environment was when their illness or their symptoms began. Was there ventilation? Were they exposed to toxins in the workplace, in their community? And did they ever have to change their job due to health reasons? Also, did they know if they ever had a chemical exposure? You know, the nurse who says every time I work the night shift and I have respiratory problems knows that the floor cleaners that they use at night trigger something in her uniquely. This is all on a questionnaire, but just to look at all the exposures, and it goes into it with a little bit more detail. Have you put pesticides and herbicides in your home or outside your home? When was the last time your air ducts were cleaned and your filters? Do you use a gas stove or an electric stove? Are your clothes dry cleaned? We've had this conversation. Do you take the plastic off before you put it in the closet? Do you have animals in your home, and do they wear flea collars or sprays and then sleep on your pillow? Air filters, water filters. Do you heat food in the microwave, and what's the material that you heat in if you do? And do you stand away from the microwave and door while it's on? Paper plates, glass, not plastic. Even candles that often give off a fragrance can be a trigger for some people. And then there's, have you had mold in your home? Have you had a pipe leak? Have you had a roof leak? Has your air conditioner gone off for a period of time and you saw mold growing on your air vents? These are two types of mold. One is called Aspergillus. It's a mold, but it's not a toxic mold. The strongest, most toxic mold is called Stachybotrys. And if you look at the title here, it says hurts me too. If you go to a website, if you want more information, survivingmold.com. There's a medical doctor, Schumacher, who has this site and is a mold expert, and he trains physicians, and mold is becoming, just like other bacteria, viral, parasitic infections, something we are really needing to be concerned about. And unfortunately, more and more people are showing up with mold. We do testing, we do genetic testing, and we test in the home. We wipe down surfaces with the Hurts Me kit, and then it's sent into the lab and we get the results back, and it has a grade. So if this is something you're interested in, and you could certainly order the kit for yourself, for your family, and for your patients, check that out. And in the lifestyle exposures, just especially for women, hair coloring, in beauty salons, acrylic fingernails, scented soaps and detergents and perfumes, fabric softeners, recreational drugs. And in the personal exposure, we also want to know about your fillings, about your root canals, about any implants in the body. And also, if you have hobbies, what are the chemicals that are being used? This is vast. And we don't expect people to eliminate everything in their lives, but just like in a coaching model, what is one thing that you could eliminate to begin your cleansing and your healing process? And as people eliminate one thing, we go to the next, and we keep a running record for the patient and for us as the integrative nurse coach so that we can check back. And of course, we know that all these chemicals act synergistically. So it may be the chemicals in the foods, it may be the chemicals in the cleaning products, in our personal care makeup products. What happens when they all come together, and how does that overburden our detoxification pathways? Again, I've said this in previous conversations. The environmental cofactor in most of the diseases that we see today is probably about 80%. So here's a summary. You can read this on your own. We think about, was your house built before 1970, which is when lead paint was used and lead pipes were used. And you can just study this and think about what might be relevant for you in your own self-care plan, and then how you use it with patients. And again, here's another timeline that we will have you fill in as we go through the environmental assessment tool. So I'm going to stop here and let you all take a moment and go to your packet and fill out the environmental tool. And then you're going to break up into dyads to discuss what you've discovered. So the question really is going to be, what did you notice when you filled out this tool? What stood out for you? Are there any areas in your life that were aha moments? And that's just where we're going to begin with this. So take a moment and fill out the tool, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I hope that was a good exercise and experience for you. And I hope you notice some areas that you may want to take some time to reassess and reevaluate and reprioritize. You know, can you get makeup that doesn't have all the parabens and bisphenol A? Can you cook in the microwave with different materials, etc.? So the surveys and questionnaires that we use at Resilier that I just wanted to review with you, I always do the Iowa tool as my intro, just like in all coaching sessions. So I know that although we're looking at brain health, I want to know if people have an extreme amount of stress that could be causing a cascade of chemicals, of cytokines, of inflammatory chemicals that could be washing their brain cells as well. We use something called CNS Vitals, and you can go to that in the dashboard and you can pull it up and use that as another tool. We use the MOCA, and that is in your packet, and you may have used it by now. And that's really for you to use and then reuse, and you can always download for free the one page so that you can Okay, so I'm back to looking again at all the surveys and questionnaires that we use. We use the Iowa. We introduce that in every coaching session as a way to know what are the other influences. As Nicole has already shared, we want to know about sleep. Sleep has an amazing impact on the brain. We do a lot of work around sleep apnea and sleep studies. We want to know what the sleeping patterns are. If people go to bed with a lot of stress on their mind or watching the night news, everything that you've already discussed. We use something called CNS Vitals that you can access through the dashboard. You've already filled out the one-page MOCA, and that's really for you. And I would suggest as you do brain exercises and lifestyle changes, go back and pull up the MOCA again and do it again, and then monitor your score, because we use that as a real marker of improvement. We use the environmental assessment, which you've just done, the MSQ, the stress scale, which you can access on HeartMath, that's in the dashboard. We have a sleep questionnaire that you can work with, a nutrition survey, a food journal 3-day that you've already done. And we also do a caregiver assessment, because it's really important that both the caregiver is taking care of themselves and also that they understand the process of what's going on and how they can best support their person in their life. So we also evaluate neurological function. We look at the microbiome. We look at heavy metals. We look at genetics, chemical exposures, and immune biomarkers, to name a few. Testing can be expensive. Some of the testing is done through Medicare, but much is out of pocket, unfortunately. There are some websites that you can go to where you can do a lot of testing on your own and be able to have it at a much lower cost. And you, as nurses, can certainly order them or guide people to where they might want to go to test their heavy metals, do a test for dysbiosis of the microbiome, look at if they've been exposed to heavy metals. Some of the heavy metals you can do through Quest and LabCorp, although some of the companies have a little bit more of a comprehensive way of approaching it. And these are a couple of labs, such as the microbiome stool analysis, Doctors Data in Genova with their links. Heavy metals, we use it at the office, Great Plains Lab, Genova Lab, and one called Quicksilver Scientific. And there's their websites. Quicksilver offers a combination of blood, hair, and urine. So you get to do 3 different sources to look at the levels. We also do a lot of testing on pesticides and glyphosate being the famous Roundup Monsanto product that many people have, even if they're eating organic, such as myself for many, many years, because we don't know if it's downwind, if it's the crop across the way, if what is said to be organic is really organic. We all try the best we can. But these are the main areas. Some people want to know about their ApoE34, a marker for Alzheimer's. Some people want to know about the HLA4 for mold, if they've had it in their house and if mold is within them, and if they have a genetic SNP that doesn't allow them to break down the mold and detoxify easily. There are always ways. There's homeopathics, there's chelating agents orally, there's many ways that we can detoxify. And the MOCA test you've already done, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Tool, and this is an article on measuring mental status in older adults. And this was done through the Hartford Institute of Geriatric Nursing in New York and the University Rory Myers College of Nursing. So here's a test that you could use as a nurse with your patients. If they come in and they're mentioned to you, it may not be the source of their main concern. But if they say that they've had some cognitive issues lately, which could be because of sleep, because of stress, because of diet, because of social isolation, whatever it is, you can use the MoCA test and then have them redo it, because there's a 90 to 96% sensitivity, and we really know the specificity for being able to help you as an INC detect mild cognitive impairment and help people, especially younger people, start to work on it early. Because again, the symptoms and the forgetting your keys may just be a busy life, but is it also for some people 20 years up the road, some influence? And saying that, it's sort of like diabetes, people that have blood sugar imbalances, which also affect the brain, that we could have, you know, symptoms 20 years before we're diagnosed with diabetes, that sugar craving, that hypoglycemic feeling sometimes, that I need something sweet. So it's very much the same with cognitive function, that we also often can see things way in advance. So let me go through some of the research, because I think it's really important that what we're talking about for integrative nurse coaches to work with people to optimize their brain function, we want to know a little bit about what the research shows. The first thing is the research shows that all heavy metals have a tendency, a propensity to lodge in brain tissue. So that's the first thing that's really important to notice. And the circulatory levels of toxic metals, this one talks about aluminum, cadmium, mercury, and lead in patients with Alzheimer's, is substantial. And this was a meta-analysis review of the literature. This was an article that was published in 2018, and it demonstrated that circulatory aluminum levels indicated in 17 studies that it increased the tendency for Alzheimer's. So of course, in our prevention, what do people have aluminum in? Do they wrap their food in aluminum? Do they cook in aluminum foil? Where is aluminum in their lives? And there are many sources. Here's another one, a hypothesis that aluminum significantly contributes. It's based on solid experimental evidence, and immediate steps should be taken again to have people think about, where do I have aluminum? Do I cook with aluminum? Do I eat out of aluminum cans? Are my pots and pans made of aluminum? And how do they move to stainless steel or Pyrex, or a material that is safer? And the last one here is aluminum in neurological disease, and very much showing that it's involved in inflammation and neural degeneration. We take it up sometimes regularly in the diet. We know it's used in antiperspirants. It's an adjuvant in vaccinations. It may be used in many, many different areas. And again, that's something to explore. And this was from a journal of Parkinson's disease, because a lot of times when we look at Alzheimer's, the other side of the coin is Parkinson's, MS, ALS, etc. And some of the potential risks of mercury needs to be looked at, because mercury has been shown to also be high in our lives. And exposure is mostly through fish and through seafood and amalgams. And if you recall John early on, he had 7 mercury fillings. He had them taken out, but not in the most responsible way, not with the dentist who used dental dams and protects the person from inhaling the vapors. Copper and lead. Copper and lead, we know that that is associated with cognitive decline. And these are all articles that you can access. Here's, when we look at the timeline, epigenetic and neurological impairment associated with early life exposures. And this one is to persistent organic pollutants known as POPs. And it shows that in utero, or moms that were exposed prenatally, it can lead to things like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and later in life, neurodegenerative diseases. And so what's interesting is, we look at children on one end of life cycle and Alzheimer's on the other end of the life cycle. But in that timeline, what was going on that may have been happening for many, many years? So pesticides, we talk about organic and the reason. We know that pesticides have toxic effects specifically on the central nervous system. That's how they function and work optimally. So in animals and ants and little creatures, but we also need to know what happens in humans and that there is a link based on pesticide exposure and risk factors, also for immune function, but in looking at cognitive function. And I'm going back to the mold again. Infections of fungi, which is mold, and bacteria are found in brain tissue in elderly persons diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's. And this is really interesting because we're all exposed to fungi, we're all exposed to bacteria throughout our lives, but it does something happen as we get older, and in some people there's an immunological response that might also be affecting people. And where we can see that the fungal becomes an opportunistic infection. So here's a whole book on brain behavior and immunity, looking at environmental mold and brain inflammation, leading to different memory deficits. And mold can also expose people to increases in anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue, as well as cognitive function. And sometimes they call mold the modern day great imitator because it's really random. The person who comes in and feels weak and has sensitivity to light, has difficulty finding words, their balance may be off, they have stiffness or joint pain in the morning, they might have numbness and tingling and different skin sensations, they may have a cough, chronic sinus congestion, recurrent infections and metallic taste in their mouth, mood swings. All of this can be many, many things, but don't rule out mold and ask those questions. Some foods are also high in mold, which we really don't think about, but where would mycotoxins be? And why do they need so many pesticides and fungicides sprayed on crops? So it's your grains, it's your seeds and nuts and peanuts and dried fruit sometimes, beer, wine, processed meats. It doesn't mean that your body cannot break them down in a normal, healthy system. But if somebody eats peanuts, as an example, and they say they have a peanut allergy, not a anaphylactic shock peanut allergy, but they eat peanuts and they feel weird. Is it the fungicides that they have to spray the peanut crops? Is it the mycotoxins in the peanut crops? And just to be sure that your foods do not expose you to mold. Okay, we're going to take a pause here and have you process what we've been talking about, and we will come back and start with the digestive system and the microbiome. Okay, I'm back. Hi. I hope you had some time for a stretch and a break and some movement and some reflection on what we've talked about so far. And let's move on to the microbiome, which we know has many more billions of cells than the cells that make up our body. So the microbiome is actually considered an organ. This is from the Annals of Neurology in 2017. Almost half the cells and 1% of the unique genes found in our bodies are human. 1%. Half the cells and 1% of our genes. The rest are from microbiome organisms or microbes, predominantly bacteria, fungi, and viruses. Emerging evidence links the gut microbiota to neurological disease, increasing risk activity and progression. And that has to do with, one of the questions. Did you take antibiotics as a child? Have you had antibiotics in your daily health protocols? Do you eat commercial meat, which is where we get 80% of our antibiotics? And so we're looking at how we engage people in thinking about how that might impact their gut health, their digestive health, and that could be subtle, but their immune health and their brain. So here's an article on the microbiome in our internal environment. Previous studies have shown the gut microbiota associated with neuropsychiatric disorders, as well as other autoimmune labels, diagnoses like Parkinson's, ALS, as well as depression. And in Alzheimer's, it may contribute to the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's. And so we look at the different strains when you do a stool analysis, such as a Genova, where we're looking at Bacteroides, Lactobacillus, Bifida, and many other organisms. And here's another article specifically on the gut microbiota in Alzheimer's and the complexity of this. And that since we know that this is a connection, it really behooves us, whether it's eating a very special kind of yogurt or being able to take a probiotic that's reputable and alive so that you can constantly be replenishing. So just very briefly, I want you to go over the gut and how it works. And when we have imbalance in our good organisms, we tend to have these open spaces that you could see, and those are called originally tight junctions that open up, and that's what's called gut permeability. Toxins, parasites, yeast, imbalance in the microbiome, all of those can trigger it, as well as certain foods and digestive issues that come before. Some of the chronic ailments that we associate with that could be IBS, fibromyalgia, cognitive and neurological dysfunction, to name a few. And that's because when those tight junctions are open and foods and toxins and undigested particles all get absorbed too quickly without the digestive system really being able to break them down, we tend to have more tendency toward autoimmune issues, bowel permeability, which could be, and that can cause pain and inflammation in joints, sometimes even leading to things like arthritis or allergic responses. And so it's really important that both the gut and the liver are functioning optimally. When we think about the gut, we also have to think about detoxification. And before we go into detoxification, Nicole is going to talk about the elimination food plan. I'll just briefly review that detoxification principles are minimizing the exogenous toxic exposures, ensuring adequate hydration, because we know that the kidneys and the bowel need adequate liquids in order to function and to detoxify and to move and mobilize in the bowel for optimal excretion. We also want to be sure that we have the nutrients, and we'll go into this after too, be able to have our mitochondria function. That's the inner cell of the cell, where that's kind of the brain of on our cellular level, and we need that to be really functional. We also want to be able to have the nutrients to what we'll call biotransformation of our toxins, breaking them down from where they are in the body, in the liver. Usually they're what we'll call lipophilic, and we want to convert them to a hydrophilic water soluble so that they could be excreted through all our organs. And we're going to go through the foods that help to do that. And so I mentioned hydrophilic toxins and compounds. We want all chemicals and all our body processes, even those that are made within our system, to be able to be excreted in the urine and the bile. They come in lipophilic, that's how they're processed. And when they're altered and we have the proper nutrients, they become water soluble for optimizing excretion. The liver has two main phases, phase 1 and phase 2. And this is a very simple example of the purple circle is a xenobiotic, an estrogen-like compound in the environment. Bisphenol A could be one. And it goes into what we're called phase 1 cytochrome P450 in the phase 1 cycle of the liver, where things are still lipophilic. And phase 1 has 60 to 80 different enzyme pathways that help break everything down. And you will get to see that nutrients are involved in all of the enzymatic processes. When they're broken down, they go into what's called a reactive intermediate. Now that reactive intermediate must get to the phase 2 conjugation, where it is then inert and water soluble. Nutrients, lowering toxic body burden is the first one. And the second one is having the nutrients to help that process happen. Here's another way of looking at it. You have the fat soluble toxin converting to the water soluble, whether it's drugs, toxins, or certain foods. And you have all of the P450 enzymes that are going to conjugate for elimination through phase 2. Just like always to give visuals, because different people will grasp these in different ways. And of course, there's genomic variations. You know, why do some people take a Tylenol or two and they wind up in the ER because they get Tylenol toxicity? In the phase 1, they are lacking certain cytochrome P450 enzymes to break down the Tylenol, to convert it so it could become water soluble and excreted. Why do some people have a cup of coffee in the morning and they can't sleep at night? Same reason. So it's very important we tweak the phase 1 and we tweak the phase 2 for being able to break down what's in the body and then to be able to eliminate it. This is another schematic that shows you specifically in the water soluble phase 2 some of the actions that are needed and the nutrients that are needed, your antioxidants, your minerals, your green tea catechins, all of it involved with all of these pathways that we will go through, the sulfation, glucuronidation, glutathione. You do not have to memorize these, but once things are passed to phase 2 and become water soluble, you can now excrete them more readily in the body. So now we're going to just go a little bit more into the nutrients that are needed for detoxification. And this doesn't necessarily mean taking a supplement. It just means having adequate nutrients in whole, healthy foods. And the body will know what to do with these nutrients. And this is why people that eat a poor diet, a standard American diet, over time, just may have higher levels of toxins and may also have more tendency toward things like cognitive decline. Again, your phytochemicals, your cruciferous vegetables, your garlic, all contribute to healthy detoxification pathways where you have the waste products that are water soluble and they're eliminated through the bile, the bowel, the kidneys, the urine, and not listed here, but indirectly, your breath and your skin, all very important. So when we look at phase 1 and phase 2, here's a really good way to look at the phase 2 metabolic pathways once something is broken down in the liver, your major organ of detoxification and transformation. You'll see for the glutathione, these are the different pathways. For glutathione, what's needed, for example, watercress and your cruciferous vegetables. For same with sulfation. For glucuronidation, things like artichoke leaf has been shown to really tweak that path. Magnesium, B6, folate, B12. And if you look at the green boxes below, they also need to detoxify the pathways, all of the chemicals that you take in. Your estrogens, your testosterone, your thyroid medications, your cortisol that might be high because you're under stress, your other hormones. And as you go toward methylation, which is really important, methylation really means all your B vitamins. And some people have genetic SNPs where they don't have good methylation pathways. B12, folate, B6, B3, a good multivitamin B complex, or the food sources that have the vitamin Bs. And this is a little harder to see perhaps, but this also shows you a little bit more of each of the pathways. And then I'm going to move myself here so you could see it a little better. Both the drugs, the chemicals in the environment, and the dietary factors that contribute. And I know this is a small chart, but we're going to put it in the dashboard so that you'll be able to see it. So for example, if you want to know where the medication Tylenol is broken down, you'll see that it says under sulfation, under drugs. If you want to know where your heavy metals are mainly broken down, it's the glutathione pathway. And glutathione, again, is made from all of your nutrients, your CoQ10, your selenium, your alpha lipoic acid, vitamin C, all of which you get in a whole food healthy diet, which again has a lot of implication. And this is an easy way to understand this. If you look at your circle on the right, your watercress, broccoli, all your cruciferous vegetables are the highest in nutrients that tweak the phase 2 detoxification. So why do we say broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, arugula, cabbage, kale, etc. is important for one to have in their food plan? For exactly that reason. So I'm going to stop here and we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk about some food plans. So I hope you will take a breath of fresh air, take a stretch with Nicole, and I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, so what are the foods for optimizing brain resiliency? You've already gone through the elimination food plan so that you could tweak your detoxification pathways and remove and eliminate any of the foods that might be contributing to any of the symptoms. We put most people on elimination food plans to begin, and then we move into other food plans. So the first thing to really just review is that food affects your brain through inflammation. Anyone that's ever had a gluten sensitivity and has brain fog or an allergy that contributes to any kind of inflammatory process, know that it also probably is affecting your brain because of the gut-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier, it's very easy for things to circulate. And food can turn inflammation up, meaning if somebody is eating a really chemical poor diet, using artificial sweeteners like aspartame, diet soda, or food can turn inflammation down, like switching to a green tea. And it can also have an effect on mental health because food affects all aspects of our being, and certainly our gut, which is where our neurotransmitters are housed. Now, when we look at foods for brain health, there's three main food plans that we want to think about. We've all heard about the ketogenic food plan. It's very popular now. The paleo has been around a while. And then there's the Mediterranean, which is in your book, and there's a pyramid, and it's written about in the nutrition chapter. We won't spend time on the Mediterranean, but you could see if we look at the Mediterranean, although it's a whole food plan, it's 45 to 50% carbs, although they may be complex carbs and they may also be carbs from some fruits. Oh, and not to mention wine. The paleo is an in-between plan, and many times people will start with that, where the protein is 20 to 35%, the carbs are 20 to 30%, and the fats are 30 to 50%. The keto has been the diet that's been most studied for brain health, if people can handle it. It started with epileptic children. When they were given the keto food plan, their seizures got better. And that was an aha moment for neurology to say, what is it that is special about it? Well, if you look at the keto, it's only 5% carbs. It's mainly fats, and fats convert to energy, but the kind of energy the brain uses well. It also is very helpful in weight loss programs. Some of the problems we have with some of our patients is we don't want them to lose too much weight. So we have to work really hard to make sure they're getting adequate fats that are not just being burned and utilized for energy, that they're getting enough to store. So we might think about more seeds and nuts and nut butters. We might think about, the avocados and other healthy fats. Avocado oil, olive oil. So the keto food plan, this is an example. Red cherry tomatoes is some of your nutrients. And then there's avocado and egg. Organic egg if possible, because the eggs carry whatever the chemicals are that the chickens were fed. So in a keto diet, it's very high fat, low carb, and it has a fasting-like effect, so it brings your body to what's known as a state of ketosis. And ketone bodies are known to be neuroprotective, and they specifically have an impact on aging brain cells. And they also enhance mitochondrial function, reducing inflammation and any kind of other apoptotic mediators. So we want the keto to be able to really enhance somebody when they're going through, sorry, I don't know where to put me, when they're going through an Alzheimer's lifestyle resiliency program. So again, carbs are 5%, and that's usually from fruits like berries. Proteins are about 20%. And some of the proteins and fats overlap. But here's an example. You see if people can handle cheese, coconut, avocado, fish, chicken, meat, hopefully grass-fed. The keto is really an interesting plan. And, sometimes when people change to the keto, and then they do the MOCA score, and they've worked on other lifestyle areas like learning how to deal with stress, learning how to optimize sleep. It's really, really impressive how their cognitive function comes back. This is an article actually from a ketogenic diet and Alzheimer's disease in the International Journal of Molecular Science, 2019. So this is really new, current, updated information. And we always say, just like the elimination food plan, it's worth it to try it on yourself, to see the challenges, and then to work with people on where were your challenges. How are you doing this? Now, along with the keto, and Nicole probably already spoke about this, is part of this is also what we're calling an intermittent fasting protocol, which means a minimum of 12 hours from the time you eat at night to the time you eat in the morning. That couch potato or getting up in the night and snacking does not work. So if someone eats a meal at 6 to 7 in the evening, the earliest they should be eating, having their coffee, although black coffee is probably okay, is 6 or 7 the next morning. If you can stretch it to 14 hours till 9 a.m., that's even better according to science and the results. So what are some of the benefits of the keto food plan? The brain benefits are mitochondrial biogenesis, improves BDNF production, and I believe Nicole already spoke about BDNF in sleep and in other ways for really getting the brain factors elevated. That helps support brain function. It improves insulin signaling. Remember, sugar, diabetes can be an indicator of cognitive decline. Reduces oxidative stress. It helps to balance glutamate and GABA, GABA being one of the neurotransmitters that helps with relaxation and calming the brain. And it increases your omega-3s, which is also in the food plan. I'm just going to say a little bit about this. NAD is a enzyme. The real name is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and it's a cofactor in all living cells. And there's a lot of compelling research that shows NAD's unique ability to protect tissue and induce DNA repair and increase lifespan. And it's long been known to have an important role in transference of energy into the mitochondria and converting it into cellular energy. So this has really important implications in the field of neuroscience. And it says reduces DNA damage in the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is one of the areas of the brain that we see often damaged when we do special MRIs and we look at the brain dysfunction. So we're going to stop here for a moment and then we're going to go on to the paleo. So think about the keto and think about what is it that you could do to try to change some of your food patterns and switch to a keto. In your dashboard, there is a packet on the keto food plan. I believe there's even some recipes on what you can make that you would enjoy. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk a little about the paleo food plan. The paleo comes from an era 10,000 years ago to 2.5 million years ago when there were hunters and gatherers and they ate wild animal and seeds and nuts and berries and plants. And basically, it is what is coming back into consciousness today. And, you know, it really preceded farming in many ways. Although now in today's world, we include legumes and grains and dairy products. But that is fairly recent. If you look at it, it's similar to the keto, but it offers you more carbs and a little less fat and a little more protein, as the earlier chart showed. So very often we transition people to a paleo or a Mediterranean. People are eating a fast food diet and they're really not involved in nutrition awareness. It sometimes helps to start here and then see how they do and then segue them to the next. So the paleo is a really good option, and we'll have a paleo diet guideline for you in the dashboard that you'll have when you leave the program. So just to review, the keto is where we want to get to. The Mediterranean is where we might begin with somebody to ease them in and then move to the paleo. So it happens in stages as people are handling and keeping a food journal and letting you know what works and doesn't work. Again, we're not being the nutritionist, but we're being the nutrition educator and guide and coach. And as you all know, my own work in nutrition really is through a coaching model and being able to ask people what worked for them, what do they feel is doable, what do they feel they might want to change and modify. And we modify all the time. Someone says, I just can't eat that much avocado or eggs, or, you know, we even have vegan options. That's a little more challenging, but certainly that is an option. And before we move on from the food, I want to just make you all aware that questions that you have and thoughts that you have can all be sent via Ronnie to me, and I will answer you personally on anything that was presented. I know this is a very big, vast area. Um, Again, what I want to do is go back to a case study now and in real time and or a real person, I should say, and have you walk through this with me. So Rose is somebody that I saw not long ago. She lives in Mexico City. She's 3 years old, 63 years old, and very active, vivacious woman, comes from a big social network, big family, house and farm in the country, big apartment in Mexico City. Think Mexico City for a minute, what we know about Mexico City. Start with air pollution. Her family noticed that she had some cognitive decline over the past year, subtle. Sometimes she couldn't remember a word or follow directions, or she was slower to respond to questions, and that was a concern to her family. Now, these are things we would never say this person has Alzheimer's. We just say that they are noticing some cognitive change. And so they had the means, and they came to Florida to work with us, and they stayed a month and did testing and coaching and nutrition and a protocol, and saw the doc, and we went over all the labs. And when we started with Rosa and she came to me, we started with a food plan, and it evolved into higher vegetables because she didn't eat many vegetables. She ate a lot of gluten, and we picked up on one of her tests that she may have had some what's called gliadin sensitivity. So we thought, let's take her off gluten. That could be a trigger. It could be an inflammatory chemical. We suggested she try not to have sugar in pastries, but that was her favorite. we did pick up in her testing that she had high mercury. We didn't know where it was coming from, but we suggested that she stop eating a lot of seafood. We didn't know where it was coming from, and fish, and to avoid it. We were moving her toward a keto diet. She didn't have organic, so we did some research of what she could get organic in Mexico City. We referred her to Environmental Working Group, referred her to Amazon, because Amazon you can get products, not so much food as home cleaning products and personal care products that she was able to use. The challenges I had with Rose is that it was very hard for her to change her pattern. She was a very strong woman set in her ways. And we came up with the most helpful would be a meal plan of what she could eat and not eat every day that she would remember, and she would try that. On another part of her life, we wanted to know about the air quality in her community. She'd moved to a new house that did not have central AC. We wanted her to get an air filter for her bedroom and monitor the air quality outside, which you can do, and there's testing for that. We also wanted to test her water that she was drinking, because she had originally reported that the water was brown when she was drinking it. She got a very good air quality filter for the whole house, and when she tested it, it was negative for chemicals. So we're going with that, although we asked her to put an additional water filter in the kitchen where she cooks her food. Her biggest lifestyle factor was that we think she had sleep apnea, and she was about to get tested in Mexico City and do a sleep study. And then she was not an active person. She was a social person. So we encouraged her to begin walking daily. And that was over a couple of coaching sessions and a couple of visits. As I mentioned, she lived in Florida for 1 month, so I got to see her regularly every week. And she would work from week to week on her food, on her walking, on her brain exercises, which were things like Brain HQ. And we'll have some information for you in the dashboard. It's another wonderful brain gym product that you can access, and you can get them for free. So for your own self-care plan, you may want to integrate that as well. And so let's look at what the plan was when Rose was getting ready to leave, where we were looking at different lifestyle aspects. Her diet, she was adhering to a mainly detox meal plan of 80%, although she was still eating out 2 to 3 times a week. And we realized, being in Florida, that was probably part of the lifestyle change here. When she goes out, she doesn't recall to order special foods. Her husband is very helpful, and he's her main support, along with a daughter and a son who live in Mexico City. We tried to get her to start the keto process, so to wait 2 or 3 hours after dinner before bed, although we didn't yet set up an intermittent fasting structure. After 1 month, we had her adhering 100% to the detox meal plan when she went back to Mexico City, eating more vegetables, not having any gluten, bread, and sugar and pastry. And she was choosing food in restaurants with the help of her husband, and she was doing the intermittent fasting 3 hours after dinner, 12-hour total, 7 days a week. The hope is, and we haven't yet worked with her, she'll be coming back before the new year to the clinic, that she would be on a 100% keto diet. And we're going to document that she's in ketosis. We'll give her a ketometer, which is a way of measuring, and that she would be following that plan. Sleep, she had very little awareness of sleep hygiene, and we needed to do a lot of education. Eating earlier at night seemed to help somewhat, and we discussed the importance of a sleep study, and that where she's going to do some lifestyle changes for sleep, cup of green tea at night instead of a cafe at dinner, etc. And we're going to see what the sleep study shows and if she'll need a CPAP or anything like that. The wellness plan was our entire nurse coach review, specifically looking at food, sleep, movement, and relaxation. She happened to be a high energy woman, and I'd say she carried the stress within. Detoxification, we began with food. She did get some supplements, avoidance of chemicals. As I mentioned, we went on Amazon and we were able to order Burt's Bee and Seventh Generation and a couple of products that she could actually get shipped to Mexico City from Amazon. And we encourage using an infrared sauna to help sweat out the toxins when you're doing this detox. Remember, the skin is the largest organ of elimination. So she was adhering to all of that. And we're hoping that any mold which was in her home in the country has been remediated and that she's lowering her chemicals and her toxic metals. And she started without any exercise, working up to 30-minute walks. And now she's doing 1-hour walks. She said it was sustainable, attainable 6 times a week with her husband or daughter. And hopefully she will continue with her walking. And then something we didn't mention, but was very important to Rose because she had the high mercury in her tests, was that she needed an evaluation by a biological dentist. We got her on Denticidal toothpaste. You could get that on Amazon. It's wonderful for people that have bacteria in their mouth. There's a very big connection now between the mouth and the brain. When you think about it, it's not really very far away, is it? And through the sinus cavity and up to the brain, people can have translocation of organisms. So she's going to be seen by a biological dentist. She was seen in Miami briefly, and she could remove her mercury filling. She did not do it while she was visiting. And we're hoping to see what the results of that will be in up the road. And the last thing is, we wanted to just check her apartment, her new apartment, and wipe it down with the Hurts Me kit. It's a cloth, you wipe dust on surfaces, and if everything is okay and there's no remediation required, it's just to know that it's okay. It's a proactive preventive strategy, and hers was fine. We were waiting water toxicity results, and while she was in Florida, the results came in and it said that her water was clean. She has switched to 70% self-care products that are low risk. Her daughter took her to buy makeup at Whole Foods while she was here, and every time she comes to the States, she'll be able to purchase it. And we're hoping that she'll use the Environmental Working Group database for safe cosmetics, safe cleaning products, and also be able to make sure that all her personal care products are from there. And so hi. So I know that was a lot of information, but you could see where all of the so many aspects in our lives, based on our genetic predisposition, our early childhood exposures, even prenatally, how this can impact each of us in a different way. You know, why one has inflammation in the brain and is diagnosed with a neurological issue, why someone has inflammation in their cardiovascular system, in their digestive system. This is what makes us all unique. and each of us has our own predisposition. And the question always is, once we know that, how is it that we can intervene and try to mediate and optimize through lifestyle health ways that one can only get healthier and better as they enjoy their aging process. So I will leave you here and thank you for your being with me. And I'm there in spirit. And I really hope that you'll contact me. You'll try this for yourself. You'll work on your own self-care plan by the end of this program, and that you will start to implement it with your patients. And it may be an area, as you know, that you can create even in community, whether it's with older people or just the general population, of enhancing brain health. I mean, everybody wants to enhance brain health. With the statistics you've seen, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't have some trepidation that by the time they're 80, will they be dependent on someone else because they don't have their full faculties? Well, we can help to not ensure it, but optimize the possibilities. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the program, and I'll hope to come back on and answer any questions in person if I can. Okay? Thank you again, everybody. Bye.